So I wanted to make like a follow on from my previous video about being the victim, because I kind of touched into this topic of releasing the victim story as being such a key part of, you know, healing, awakening, personal growth. I don't know, like living living freely. And the addiction in the mind and the addiction we have to our narratives, to the victim story, it's fascinating for me how deeply it runs. And when I say it's fascinating for me, I'm not saying it from like an outside perspective of, oh, look at me looking at other humans and fascinating how caught up they are in their victim story. No, I mean, it's fascinating for me to see it play out in my own mindset and how it has played out in my own psyche throughout this journey, right? So that's kind of the space that I feel like I want to talk more from on this channel, because it really is about me exploring my psyche and sharing aspects of that can be helpful for other people. And I know that these things can be helpful for other people. So yeah, but it always comes down from the foundation of me looking at what I see, and then you see it reflected, because we've all got the same kind of minds in how they work, right? We're like, the mind thinks it's so special. So the victim story, right? It's the best story for the mind, right? Because it makes it feel like it's got something to really, I don't know, sell, or kind of, it really reinforces identity, which is what an aspect of our minds want, but that's what leads to suffering as well, is this addiction to identity, right? And the victim identity is like the one where we feel like, you know, I feel like it's also one of the last identities that we might explore. It felt like that for me when I got sick, and we try out this final identity of being a victim, and it's the worst one of the lot. And we have to see that it really sucks to sell ourselves the story of being a victim, but we also have to try it, right? That's what I did. And now what I want to encourage is, the more we become aware of this, the more that we can release it, right? So it's not a judgment on anybody for having the victim story playing out in your circumstances, but it's a seeing that feeding that is not going to serve you, right? That kind of strengthening those neural pathways of my response when things get tough is to play the victim card. It doesn't work, right? And it's miraculous how kind of much of a different response you can take. So, you know, something I was, a beautiful way that this played out in my psyche recently was, I was in the lagoon, and I like to do like wind and water sports. So I was kind of wing foiling, which is a really fun sport. And I was out like super far deep in the lagoon, and the wind died completely. So I was like 2 kilometers away from the shore, and I was kind of just stuck on my board. And you know, it could be, it was a lovely time, right? I just sat in the water, and I was behind this island, so I was like completely on my own. But I could see how in the past, the mind would go into all these narratives, which would have turned it into a problem. It would have turned this into something that, you know, now I'm stuck out here, the wind has abandoned me, and, you know, I got to find my way to get back to shore, and maybe it's going to get dark soon. And, you know, this is how my mind used to work. And now it was like, I could see the roots of those thoughts, but it was so like, oh, well, I didn't want to go down that pathway, right? And it's just like, well, you know, while I'm out here, I can actually just enjoy the connection of being in nature, in the lagoon. And who knows when the wind's going to come back, right? I could be here for hours, but such a deep trust for me, right? I'm just sharing from my perspective, because actually that's what maybe that's what I'm best at. And it was just this deep trust that no matter what happens, I will learn what I need to from this. And even that is almost a little bit too much of a victim mindset. It's funny, but it's like a sneaky layer. It's not even, I'm going to learn what I need to. It can even be more like, how can I enjoy this? You know, it's like not everything needs to be, that can be a powerful mindset as well. Like, there's something to learn from everything. There's something to learn from every person, from every experience. But then we almost have this kind of addiction to needing lessons, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that this is a bad mindset at all, but it's just like a subtle difference that is actually quite powerful experientially. And it was just like, well, I'm just going to enjoy this, you know? So, I just kind of was like, okay, well, while I'm out here, I can learn how to balance on the board a bit better, and I can like play, you know, with this and with that. Like, maybe this seems like a trivial example to people, but it was, for me, it was a cool example of how kind of doing the shadow work, doing the emotion work, releasing the trapped emotions allows a completely different way to deal with challenge in life, if that makes sense, right? So it's a key thing as well, being able to release the victim story. We have to be willing to feel into the reason that we want the victim story as well. So like the frustration would arise being out there and things just not going the way I want, and now I can't get back to the shore and blah, 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 blah. Frustration would start to arise, and then it's just like feel into the sensation of frustration. But I've obviously done a lot of work around this kind of thing for the last few years. So this is, I feel like it's important to address that as well, because, you know, I don't want to victim shame people, but or just to realize that it's not about like fighting with yourself. And I'm sure if you've watched enough of my content, hopefully that's clear by now, but you could be new. And it's about this way of being in the world kind of happens through a willingness to get in touch and allow and embrace every part of yourself and go into discomfort, right? Because it is the battle of the mind with uncomfortable sensations, which leads to the need for all these narratives, right? So the reason, if I was out there and I would want to go into all these stories of how unfair it was that I'd gone out here and this had happened, or how much of a mess it had turned into, like that would be because frustration or an emotion would be arising caused by the situation, which would have an experience attached to it physically. And, you know, we're conditioned, we conditioned ourselves, but not purposefully, but through empathic kind of impressions from other human beings as we grew up, that we don't want to feel certain experiences. And to avoid feeling those certain experiences, we'll rather tell ourselves stories in our mind about why this shouldn't have happened, and, you know, why reality went against us, or this or that. But if you come down to the root of it, it's got to do with what you don't want to feel about the situation. So there's two aspects to it, right? There's the willingness to be aware of these kind of unhelpful, negative, pointless mental loops, right? You have to be willing to let go of that. Just kind of living in a mental world where the world is against you. You're so stuck. You're never going to recover. You know, your life is just hopeless. That is just, you got to be willing to let go of that. Then at the same time, though, the other aspect of it, and it can seem kind of counterintuitive, but they're kind of two sides of the same coin, is then you have to also be willing to allow yourself to feel emotions, even the scary emotions, even the dark emotions, even the uncomfortable emotions. So that's why I said it can seem like counterintuitive, and it's paradoxical for sure. You know, you have to embrace paradox. And that is that you want to allow yourself to feel the dark stuff from a foundation of it's okay for me to feel this. And then again, the need for being a victim drops away because you're not running from anything. You realize that nothing can go wrong because there's no experience that you shouldn't feel, right? This is the foundational thing that leads to all of these kind of other narratives, is like, this experience is leading to me feeling helplessness, guilt, you know, all the fill in the blank, whatever you want to, whatever emotion. So therefore, something's gone wrong, right? It's the same as like how stress and anxiety kind of dissolves once we do a lot of this kind of deep work, or at least it did for me. That's what I can speak from, is I used to be incredibly anxious at certain stages in my life and very stressed out, and all of that has to do with trapped emotional kind of content in the body and a unwillingness to feel into the body, right? So then we will feel the need to control reality so that it doesn't lead to certain things happening. So once we do this kind of work, and that in tandem, I think, with certain kind of brain retraining approaches of, I'm going to choose a kind of more empowering outlook on experience, right? It's both. That's what I was saying earlier. Like, there's the two parts. Do the emotion work, feel into the discomfort, do the trauma work, embrace the shadow. And then at the same time, realize that you always have the choice to go down the victim pathway, or you can choose an empowering pathway, that this is actually what I want right now. This was something that I did a lot of work around, like a lot. I was journaling every single day. And when things got particularly dark, I would say, that's okay. I need to feel this. I want to feel this. And laying this kind of a foundation was very helpful for me to stop getting pulled down the victim pathway, right? But the trick is, you can't only do that work, because then you're going to get into a struggle with the shadow material, the kind of dark emotions that need to be felt, right? So this is why I don't kind of only advocate brain retraining. I talk about brain retraining a little bit, but because if you only do the brain retraining, then you can start to believe that certain emotions are wrong, certain feelings are bad, certain thoughts are bad. You kind of almost want to have a neutral approach, that whatever is in my experience is allowed to be here. And then from there, you can take the more empowering pathway, if that makes sense. So from there, you can decide now, okay, how can I just kind of see how this experience is actually something that I want, right? Maybe you want to feel a certain emotion, actually. Here's the funny thing, right? The mind is so fucking hypocritical. Whereas we will go on and on about how we want to feel we want to get in touch with our emotions. We hate being distanced from life, blah, 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 blah. So then we start to attract the experiences where maybe it will feel like things are going wrong on a relative level. And that will lead to certain emotional experiences. And then we will fall into the victim, if that makes sense, where it's like, oh, why did this happen? And they shouldn't have done that. But it's like, deep down, if we get honest with ourselves, we have to kind of see that we wanted to feel this emotion, right? This is something that I realized at some point, was it's like, I wanted to feel the helplessness, but then I would lie to myself and say that, like, oh no, something's gone wrong and now I'm in a bad situation. So I'm not trying to, accuse you. I don't know, maybe I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, but maybe I subtly am. But I just, I want to point out like how kind of contradictory and hypocritical the human mind is, where it will say it wants one thing and then, or maybe it won't even say it, but subconsciously, like, we want the light without the dark, basically. Like, we want to be in touch with life, but then we run when we really have to feel the gritty stuff. And it's okay, right? This is kind of what I'm trying to say with this point, is that it's natural. Don't beat yourself up about this. It's okay, right? Be easy on yourself. That doesn't help, beating yourself up. So don't judge yourself. Don't judge others. But do realize that sometimes we just kind of need the sword a little bit, where we're like, okay, fuck, man. Like, just stop going down that pathway, if that makes sense. Like, that was for me sometimes. It's just like, okay, I'm just going to stop spinning a negative story here, right? I can feel the kind of shadow work, but I can stop spinning a negative story of they shouldn't be this way, blah, 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 blah. But all of these things have to play out in our psyche as well. So that's what I'm trying to say. These things will come to the surface in your psyche. So don't think that you're a bad human being because you're having these parts of your psyche come up. So when I'm talking more directly like this, to saying like, don't choose that pathway, don't beat yourself up when you see that pathway, because you have to see that kind of pattern before you can release it, if that makes sense. But then this is key, which I think where we can get stuck in acceptance as an avoidance of, really releasing kind of dysfunctional patterns, is once you've accepted, like, okay, this is what's here, then we can be like, okay, but how can I not play that game anymore? Right. So, and we learn in our own ways, right? This is just me sharing some insights that I found helpful, and you'll kind of see these patterns play out in yourself. And then you will see, okay, well, what techniques have I learned that might be like a more empowering way to look at this situation? Could I say like, for me, this is always the foundation, is like, realizing that I want every experience that I get. And if that doesn't resonate, that doesn't resonate, but I can tell you it's a fucking beautiful way to live. People might say like, oh, I don't know what people might say, to be honest. I don't know. But I do feel like that can be triggering for some people. But I can tell you from my own experience, having lived as kind of in some of the darkest parts of my psyche, where I honestly was so depressed with my life and all of that, and I had to go through that to see the beauty in all of it. But it really is worthwhile to take the approach of whatever happens to me is what I want to happen to me, even if I can't see it yet, even if a part of me doesn't like it, that's okay. But can I just know that deep down that I wanted this experience? Because to get in a little bit more of a spiritual perspective, it's like if you think about it, whatever belief system you have is, you were nothingness, you were the universe, you were God, whatever, and you chose to have this human experience, right? And here is then where the honesty in the mind will start to fight with itself, where it's like, no, but I didn't choose this experience. I was just kind of the luck of the dice of the universe that put me here. That's the victim, right? So, be a victim if you want to. I'm not trying to be mean, but the perspective of I am kind of this, whatever, before the Big Bang, whatever, what were you? And you chose to kind of come into this world of being, and you wanted all of these experiences. Because I can see it. If and this was a shift that happened to me long before I got kind of deep into spirituality. It was kind of like it happened when I was reading a lot around science and philosophy and physics, and I was like, oh my gosh, like if I think of how vast the universe is and how short the blink of a human life is, surely I would want to experience the depth of being a human, right? And that means getting my heart shattered into a million pieces, kind of grieving, feeling the incredible emotional experience of grief, of loss, of kind of fear, of terror, and then it's gone, right? So I don't know if this clicks with people, but like that perspective of course I wanted this, right, is a good way to be more honest with ourselves when we're like, something bad is happening and then we see resistance, which is going against the flow of experience. And then to be like, even that, I wanted to experience, what would it feel like to feel like a small identity that wanted to resist life, that I felt like I could actually resist life, even though it's not possible. But I actually wanted to experience that, to see what it was like. And then at some point, we had enough of that world of suffering, and then we can find our way to awakening. And you can kind of fall back into this connection with life where you realize like, wow, you were never separate. You've never actually been apart from anything. And then you can see why we would go through that, if that makes sense. I don't know, like I'm just kind of riffing here, but I do feel like that's an aspect that can make it helpful for us to be more kind of empowered around experience, because realizing that I wanted this experience, and you did, right? And again, I'm not victim shaming, I'm not gaslighting, but I'm talking from a deeper place nowadays than just health, is that once you realize these things, it's a whole different way of living, is basically what I can say. And it's worth it, is what I can say. And I don't get everything right, so I'm just kind of sharing, and if it resonates, that's wonderful. And if it's like, fuck this guy, I don't like what he's saying, then yeah, I mean, that's this as well, right? I chose that experience, right? Doesn't mean I have to like it, but it's like this kind of, this whole experience as it unfolds in each moment is exactly what we all wanted, but then we can want it to be different, right? It's like, that's the difference between pure acceptance and like spontaneous action. So, it doesn't mean we have to not want to do things and create things and to live a more fun, spontaneous, intuitive life. That's amazing, that's great, but it's like we had to experience the other side of it to realize I don't actually want to live that way, and now you can make changes. So I'm going to cut this here because I feel like I might be kind of going a little bit too far and wide, but hopefully it's helpful, and all the best on your path.